I think I met a lot of you earlier. I love to roam the audience beforehand. But I was going to ask you this question when I was roaming, and I didn't, but I'm going to ask it to you now. How many here had a mother who worked full-time 12 months a year, bar her holidays? Okay. And who minded her children when she took her holidays in the summer to go to summer schools? Okay. Just gives me a feeling for the availability, because I think women, when they're not working, are then minding the children if they have them, so it does limit their availability. So things like a creche or a couple of babysitters from Glenties might help that in the future, younger women coming and so on. I think that the theme for the school and the theme for this session are kind of interlinked. The future of Ireland, because Europe really helped to bring some gender equality to Ireland. So I think the two things are nicely linked here at the end of Joe's week and Glenty's week. A little bit of my background. I probably sound American, but I'm both Irish and American. I grew up in the United States. My father was a journalist and a very early TV news broadcaster. He had a very full career. He was very like Joe, actually. When my mother, who was similarly capable and had been a Marine during the Second World War, got married, the next 20 years was having 7 children. But she then retrained and went back to work. And all of her family were either widowed or single women, or they all worked. All my antecedents, my ancestors, women worked. They had to, because we weren't a wealthy family. And they all brought in extra money because we didn't have the money. I've been working since I was 16 in paid employment, and I make documentaries for television. Do you want me to move that a bit? No. Growing up, I had a television in our house before I was born, but I didn't see women on television unless they were in ads promoting perfect homemakers, glamorous game show assistants, or drama queens. Television did not reflect my mother's life or my grandmother's life. I didn't learn about women's lives in school or in history classes or geography classes. The only women I heard about were queens, and usually they were troublemakers, so not to be admired. When I came to Ireland in the early 1970s, the profile of women was not much. Hello. Okay. Girls to another, that astounded me. But I was most shocked to find out that sexual health information and contraception were banned. So I got involved with the Rape Crisis Center and the Early Well Women Centers, trying to get them legalized, to get information legalized. I wrote a book about women's sexual health, and to get contraception legalized. It did not make any sense to me, because how can a woman work if she can't control her fertility? How can she put a roof over her head if she can't work? And how can she put a roof over her children's head if she can't work? So I got involved in both of those. And I thought, how could a woman be equal if she's slave to a church and state's law made by men that wanted her to procreate for that state or that church's benefit? And why were there laws in Ireland prohibiting women from the right to put a roof over her head? I didn't know Irish history, because obviously I grew up mostly in America, and I knew American history, and it wasn't very women-friendly. And I didn't understand why a new Irish free state, heralded as this vision for an independent new country, would start immediately instituting laws that discriminated against women. It delegitimized them, basically. It would lock them up or deny them work or give them no option but to emigrate. I didn't understand why a new Free State government, voted in with the aid of new women voters, could renege on equality pledges, both in the proclamation and the first constitution. And because too much of that legacy of discrimination still exists today, I decided to look into that history. So last month, after about a year of work, we broadcast a series called No Country for Women. And it's all about women's voices. You will even have people today saying, well, shouldn't someone like Liam Neeson voice that? Or shouldn't there be maybe a lead male historian discussing that topic? So I said, no, I'm going to get real women, real voices, get them to tell their stories of their mothers and their grandmothers and how they hit up against the laws in Ireland that discriminated. Women weren't, the laws incarcerated, they censored, and they barred. They made women second class, and they silenced them. So this whole talk I'm trying to give is about making sure we hear women's voices. Women also weren't promoted to senior levels where policy, including educational and economic, was made. They were locked up and kept quiet for threatening a man's property or inheritance by having his child outside marriage, and most importantly, they were constitutionally silenced in the public sphere by their positioning in the home. For a significant number of women in Ireland of the past, home was a carceral institution or a place, whether they were married or a Maggie. A woman's place in the home was where her husband lived or where the church or state placed her. Bars to work or social services if she was on her own or through lack of pay made it almost impossible for her to make a home of her own. That homelessness statistic today, the homelessness statistics today reflect that legacy. And legacy is important. The legacy of Irish women not being treated as equal citizens, because the legacy of laws shape and message society. I work with women, really bright women, who will say to me regularly, oh, I couldn't go for a job as a producer, or I couldn't go for that, because would they be interested? And it astounds me. And when you ask them, their mother was barred from work in the 70s, or their grandmother was barred, or somebody got pregnant and the family was shamed. And it is this socialization of you're not equal and you're not good enough. Discriminatory custom and practice still thrives. The historical discrimination perpetuated against women effectively disabled their citizenship and shut them up. Through censorship of testimony in rape cases, and in the documentary, Lavinia Kerwick, I don't know if you all know her, but she was the first woman really to speak out in the early 1990s for her, the person who raped her not being put in prison, even though he said he was guilty. And she was never heard in the court, and she has always been very upset by that. But censorship early in Ireland and barring women from jury service effectively took them out of the legal sphere. They did not have a voice in that sphere. And I think that that's largely why our rape laws are so bad as they are today for women, which today I was hearing they're trying to move on that again. Making access to social supports, property, inheritance, contraception, and divorce either illegal or contingent on their husband's superior right was also an issue. So the big question for me was always, why would a society want to shut women up or keep them out? I'm sure there are very complex arguments about this, but I still think it's all about money. One group's economic advantage being prioritized over another. And I think this is also involved in our discrimination of others, whether they're immigrants or whatever. This is our land, this is our property, we don't want other people, this is our culture. And we are all the same inside. So that's where I come from. The New Ireland run by men had a vision of middle-class Catholic supremacy, which was not economically advantageous if women had an equal role, if they vied for men's jobs or land or inheritance. Ireland, free from the colonizer, struggled financially, so it colonized its own. It created a handmaid's tale. Jobs for the boys quelled chaos and some dissent. Land had value and cash was hard to come by. It was invested in men's hands. Men who owned the land needed to be protected from women who might make claims against them for that land, like pregnant women with illegitimate babies fathered by those men. It also didn't suit politicians who needed the votes of businesses run by men, who in turn needed the custom of, say, a mental asylum or a Magdalen laundry, which were the industrial parks of their day, to thrive. Women didn't have money or land or rights, so they didn't have power in these spheres. For 100 years, this kind of discrimination has been custom and practice in Ireland because it suited the wallets of those in power. The economic and social system was perpetuated in their interest. Custom and practice as justification is still being used today to discriminate against one group to the advantage of another. Today, that discrimination might be related to age or color or nationality, sexual orientation, gender identity, and as we've seen this week again, age. A community may not want a halting site or social housing with single mothers or a mosque near them because it may affect their property prices. So, as you were saying, we're all culpable in this. Are we really listening to the disadvantaged voices in Ireland any better today? Is not listening making Ireland a better place to live? This morning at one of the panels, somebody said, I think it's really great. It was an economic panel. We need to be aspirational. And I think absolutely the opposite. I want Ireland to inspire through the arts and other areas, and not aspirational feels to me like stepping over somebody else to get something better for yourself. And I'm not in favor of that. In the case of women today, we still make up less than a quarter of voices heard in serious broadcasting. News, current affairs, history, and that's shocking to me. Yes, women feature in makeover, reality, soap, and entertainment programs that often place them in a domestic world. Some broadcast decision makers still stand by the view that audience prefer a man's voice, or that a man's voice adds weight to his discussion topic, or a big name is needed to front a program when that big name is a man's. Those in power don't see the discrimination because they haven't lived it, seen it, or heard the story. It doesn't impinge on their life. And I think that leap into becoming empathetic and more compassionate to people who don't have the same lives as ourselves is vital. The media's representation of women isn't far off the rest of Irish society. I'm sure you all know the statistics, and probably other people here will tell them better than me, but only 16% of women make it to boardrooms. Less than a quarter land in influential or senior university roles. 22% get as far as the Dáil. I think it was about 40 or 45% ended up being here this year. And I think we all have to do a little nudging. I like to nudge through documentaries, because how do we know what policies to vote for or what democratic and social changes are needed if we don't hear real-life experience on broadcast platforms from the voices of those living in Ireland? If we don't hear the story of the mother trying to raise her child in a bed and breakfast, or indirect provision, or afraid to take a job in case she loses her housing benefit, or anxious about hers and her children's future because of lower pay, a poorer pension, bad housing, or deathly errors in health screening. Yes, we pay a gosh awful lot in tax, and public service costs money. But do we really want a society that disadvantages or harms people because of their color, age, gender, or class? Because we don't listen to their voices and really enter their lives enough to have that compassion. If we learned anything from the famine, might it be that a country doesn't thrive when one crop is nourished to the detriment of others? Discrimination dehumanizes, it makes it easier to discriminate further. Voicing inequity helps us question why we would support a regime that discriminates, whether workplace or government or their alliances. Because we can, because we vote, we have a voice. Each little action we take can make a difference for the betterment of our society. Ireland has changed hugely and for the better because of our connection with Europe. In the documentary series, a number of participants, including former President Mary Robinson, saw Europe as a key and forceful nudger of Ireland's equality changes. But we all need to listen to the voices of those still not being treated equally today if we want Ireland to continue to thrive. We can do so by supporting history in the classroom, by supporting public service media across all platforms, by telling the stories of all who live on this island. And if we don't, how do we know what policies are needed, who we want to vote into power, and what is the state of this democracy? Lack of strong education and public service broadcasting support in America is hugely culpable, I believe, in the current and threatening political situation that has global reach. Do we really want Ireland to go the same way? Because we've been there before. And all the global signs are beginning to show that it could be happening again. Democracy depends on the rule of law. If those laws aren't devised using truth, real facts, benevolence, and common interest, democracy dies. The media has a huge role in preserving democracy. It's a privilege for me, it makes my life worthwhile actually, to contribute to Ireland's public service side of that media. There are also huge responsibilities. One is to nurture the voices of Ireland in an equal way. Summer schools, ordinary schools, universities, businesses, county councils, Dáil Éireann, the EU, and your local community here in Glentees all have the same responsibility to support Ireland's democracy thrive in a world where it is otherwise so very threatened. Thank you.